For 28 years, I believed my father abandoned us when I was 5. My mother painted him as a monster who chose money over family. But 3 months ago, I learned the truth. My mother had been lying to me my entire life, and when I confronted her about it, she had no idea what was coming next. If stories like this get your blood boiling, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more family drama that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. And drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. My name is Britany, and I need to start from the beginning so you understand how deep this betrayal goes. I was 5 years old when my father, Stephen, supposedly walked out on us. At least, that's what my mother Alice told me every single day for the next 23 years. She painted this picture of him as this selfish man who cared more about his business deals than his own daughter. "Your father chose money over us, Brittany," she'd say whenever I asked about him. "He had a chance to stay and be a real father, but he picked his career instead. Some men just aren't built to be family men." Alice made sure I knew how hard she worked to raise me alone. She'd remind me constantly about the sacrifices she made, the jobs she took, the nights she cried herself to sleep because Stephen left us with nothing. She told me he never paid child support, never called, never even sent a birthday card. I grew up hating a man I barely remembered. The few memories I had of Stephen were fuzzy. A tall man with kind eyes who used to read me bedtime stories. But Alice convinced me those memories were just a child's fantasy. She said I was too young to remember how mean he really was. When I turned 18, I asked Alice if I could try to contact Stephen. Maybe we could have some kind of relationship, I thought. But Alice broke down crying. She begged me not to reach out to him. "He'll just hurt you again," she sobbed. "He made it clear he wants nothing to do with us. Please don't put yourself through that pain." So I didn't. I respected my mother's wishes and tried to move on, but deep down, there was always this empty feeling, like something was missing from my story. Alice and I had a complicated relationship because of all this. She was overprotective, always worried I'd abandon her like Stephen did. Every time I made a new friend or started dating someone, she'd get anxious. She'd make comments like, "Just remember, blood family is all you can really trust. Everyone else will eventually leave." This affected every relationship I had. I struggled to trust men, always waiting for them to choose something else over me. I had commitment issues because I was terrified of being abandoned again. Alice's version of Stephen's story shaped my entire view of love and loyalty. By the time I was 25, I was seeing a therapist named Dr. Martinez to work through these abandonment issues. She suggested that maybe reaching out to Stephen could give me closure, even if he rejected me. But every time I brought this up to Alice, she'd have the same reaction: tears, panic, begging me not to open old wounds. 3 years passed. I got engaged to my boyfriend Simon, and Alice seemed happy about it. But even then, she'd make comments about how I needed to make sure he's not like your father, and don't give him any reason to leave you. The engagement ended up falling apart, partly because of my trust issues, and partly because Simon said Alice was too involved in our relationship. He wasn't wrong. Alice had opinions about everything: where we lived, how we spent our money, even when we planned to have kids. After Simon and I broke up, Alice was actually relieved. "You're better off," she said. "Men like that always leave eventually. At least you found out now instead of after you had children." But I wasn't better off. I was 28, single, and still carrying around all this baggage about my father. I felt like I was never going to be able to have a healthy relationship until I dealt with this Steven situation once and for all. That's when I made a decision that changed everything. 3 months ago, Alice had to have emergency surgery for appendicitis. She was in the hospital for a week, and I stayed at her house to take care of her cat and collect her mail. While I was there, I decided to clean out some of the clutter in her spare bedroom. Alice was a bit of a hoarder, not the extreme kind you see on TV, but she kept everything just in case. The spare room was full of boxes she'd been meaning to sort through for years. I figured I'd help her out and organize things while she recovered. Most of the boxes contained old clothes, books, and random household items. But then I found a box labeled Important Documents, shoved way back in the closet. Inside were the usual things: tax returns, insurance papers, her divorce decree from Stephen. But at the bottom of the box, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a thick manila envelope full of letters, all addressed to me, all from Stephen, and they went back 23 years. My hands were shaking as I opened the first one. It was postmarked just 2 months after he supposedly abandoned us. The letter was written in careful handwriting, and it started with "My dearest Britany." In the letter, Stephen explained that Alice had moved away with me in the middle of the night without telling him where we went. He'd been searching for us ever since. He wrote about how much he missed me, how sorry he was that Alice felt she needed to leave, and how he hoped we could work things out as a family. The second letter was from 6 months later. Stephen had hired a private investigator to find us. He'd discovered where we were living and wanted to arrange visitation. He talked about the child support payments he'd been sending to Alice's bank account every month, and how he'd saved up money for my college fund. Wait, child support payments? Alice always told me Stephen never paid a dime. I kept reading, and the story got worse. Letter after letter, Stephen begged Alice to let him see me. He sent photos of himself so I wouldn't forget what he looked like. He wrote about missing my birthdays, my first day of school, all the milestones he was being forced to miss. In one letter from when I was 8, Stephen wrote that he'd been calling Alice every week trying to arrange a visit, but she kept hanging up on him. He mentioned that he'd tried showing up at my school, but Alice had apparently told them he was dangerous and wasn't allowed near me. Dangerous? The man in these letters sounded heartbroken, not dangerous. As the years went on, Stephen's letters became more desperate. When I turned 16, he wrote about how he'd saved enough money to pay for my entire college education, and he was hoping Alice would finally let him be part of my life. He even included bank statements showing the college fund he'd set up for me. The last letter was from my 18th birthday. Stephen wrote that he understood I was an adult now and could make my own decisions about whether to have a relationship with him. He included his phone number, his address, and an email address. He said he'd wait to hear from me, but he wouldn't keep sending letters if I didn't want them. "I love you more than you'll ever know, Britany," he wrote. "I never stopped fighting for you, and I never will. But I also don't want to cause you any pain. If you want to reach out, I'll be here. If you don't, I'll understand. Just know that not a single day has gone by that I haven't thought about you and wished things were different." I sat in that spare bedroom for 3 hours, reading 23 years' worth of letters from a father who never abandoned me. A father who'd been trying to find me, support me, and love me from a distance, while Alice convinced me he didn't care. But the letters weren't the worst part. At the very bottom of the envelope, I found copies of bank statements. Stephen had been sending child support every single month for 23 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. Money that was supposed to help raise me, and money Alice had been keeping for herself while telling me we struggled because Stephen left us with nothing. I also found a copy of their original custody agreement, joint custody. Stephen was supposed to have me every other weekend and one evening a week. Alice had violated the custody order from the very beginning and then moved states to make it harder for Stephen to enforce it. My whole life was a lie. The man I'd been taught to hate had actually been fighting for me all along. The mother I'd been protecting and sympathizing with had been lying to me every single day for over 2 decades. I took photos of everything with my phone, put the documents back in the box exactly how I found them, and left Alice's house. I needed time to think about what I was going to do with this information. I couldn't sleep for 3 days after finding those letters. Every conversation I'd ever had with Alice replayed in my mind, but now I could see the lies woven through every single one. All those times she cried about how hard it was to raise me alone. She wasn't alone. Stephen was sending money and trying to be involved. All those times she said Stephen chose money over family. He was literally sending his money to support his family. All those times she said he never cared about me. He'd written me over 100 letters telling me how much he loved me. Alice had stolen my childhood with my father. She'd stolen his money. And she'd made me complicit in hating him by convincing me he was the villain. I was angry, but I was also strategic. I knew that if I confronted Alice right away, she'd just deny everything and probably destroy the evidence. I needed to be smart about this. First, I reached out to Stephen. I found his most recent address online and sent him an email. I kept it simple. Hi, Stephen. This is Britany. I found your letters. I'd like to talk. Can you call me? He called me within an hour. When I heard his voice for the first time in 23 years, I started crying. He was crying too. Britany? Is this really you? I can't believe. I've been waiting for this call for so long. We talked for 3 hours. Stephen filled in all the gaps that the letters couldn't cover. He told me about the years he spent trying to find us after Alice moved. He'd hired lawyers, private investigators, even tried to get the police involved. But Alice was good at covering her tracks. He told me about the college fund he'd been saving for me. It now had over $200,000 in it. He told me about the birthday and Christmas presents he'd bought me every year, hoping someday he'd get to give them to me. They were all stored in a closet in his apartment. Stephen had never remarried. He said he couldn't move on knowing his daughter was out there somewhere, probably thinking he didn't love her. I knew Alice was telling you bad things about me, he said, but I hoped that someday you'd be old enough to hear my side of the story. I just never imagined it would take this long. We made plans to meet in person the following weekend, but first I had to deal with Alice. When she got out of the hospital, I waited a few more days for her to recover. I wanted her to be feeling strong when I confronted her, because I wanted her full attention for what was about to happen. I invited Alice to dinner at her favorite restaurant. She was so happy. She thought I was being extra attentive because of her surgery. She had no idea what was coming. Halfway through dinner, I put my phone on the table and opened the photo album where I'd saved pictures of Stephen's letters. Alice, I said calmly, I need you to explain something to me. I slid the phone across the table, showing her a photo of one of Stephen's letters. Alice's face went completely white. Where did you get this? She whispered. From your house. The box in the spare room closet. 23 years worth of letters, Alice. 23 years of child support payments. 23 years of lies. Alice started crying immediately, but these weren't her usual manipulative tears. These were panic tears. Britany, you don't understand. I can explain. No, I cut her off. You're going to listen to me for once. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand what you stole from me? People in the restaurant were starting to stare, but I didn't care. You stole my father from me. You stole his money and then lied to me about struggling financially. You made me believe I wasn't worth loving, Alice. You convinced me that my own father didn't want me. Alice was sobbing now. I was protecting you. Stephen was going to take you away from me. I couldn't lose you. Protecting me? You had joint custody. He wasn't going to take me away. He wanted to be my father, and you wouldn't let him. You don't remember how bad things were between us, Alice said desperately. Stephen and I fought constantly. I thought it would be better if... Better for who? Better for you? Because it sure wasn't better for me, and it wasn't better for Stephen. I leaned across the table and looked her right in the eyes. I talked to him, Alice. I called Stephen 3 days ago. We talked for hours. He told me everything. The lawyers, the investigators, all the money you spent running from him. All the years he spent wondering if I was okay. Alice stopped crying and stared at me. You called him? I did. And I'm going to see him this weekend. We're going to start building the relationship you stole from us 23 years ago. Britany, please. You can't trust him. He'll just hurt you again. Stop lying, I said, louder than I meant to. He never hurt me the first time. You're the one who hurt me. You're the one who's been lying to me my entire life. Alice was quiet for a moment. Then she tried a different approach. What about everything I did for you? I raised you by myself. I sacrificed everything. With his money, I interrupted. You raised me with Stephen's child support payments while telling me he gave us nothing. You didn't sacrifice anything, Alice. You stole from him and lied to me. That's when Alice's mask finally came off completely. Fine, Alice said, her voice changing from sad to cold. You want the real truth? Stephen wasn't the perfect father you think he was. We got divorced for a reason. What reason? I asked. He was controlling. He wanted to make all the decisions about your future. He had this whole plan for your life that didn't include what I wanted. What kind of plan? Alice hesitated, then said, he wanted to move us to California for his job. He said the opportunities were better there. But I had my family here. I had my life here. He didn't care about what I wanted. This was the first time Alice had ever mentioned any of this. For 23 years, her story was that Stephen chose money over family. Now, suddenly, there was this whole other narrative about control and moving to California. So, instead of working it out or compromising, you decided to disappear with me and never let him see me again. I did what I thought was best for you. No, You did what was best for you. And you know what the really sick part is? You made me feel sorry for you all these years. You made me take care of your feelings about Stephen leaving when Stephen never actually left. Alice was getting defensive now. I was a good mother to you, Britany. I loved you. I provided for you. With his money. So what if I used his money? He owed us that money. He's the one who wanted the divorce. This was news to me. Stephen wanted the divorce? Alice realized she'd said too much. It's complicated. No, it's not complicated. Either he wanted the divorce or you did. Which was it? Alice was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made my blood boil. I wanted the divorce first, but he's the one who filed the papers. Why did you want the divorce? Another long pause. We weren't compatible anymore. That's not a reason, Alice. Why did you want to divorce Stephen? Because I met someone else. The restaurant felt like it was spinning. You what? I met someone else. His name was Marcus. We were going to get married, but then he changed his mind, said he didn't want to raise another man's child. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you left Stephen for another man, and when that didn't work out, you decided to punish Stephen by keeping me away from him? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Alice? Because it sounds like you destroyed my family for a man who didn't even want me. Alice started crying again. Marcus said we could have our own children. He said it would be easier if you weren't part of the picture. I thought I was in love. So you chose Marcus over Stephen, and then when Marcus left, you were too embarrassed to admit you'd made a mistake. So you made Stephen the villain instead. Alice didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. How long were you with Marcus after you left Stephen? I asked. 6 months. 6 months. Alice destroyed my family for a 6-month relationship with a man who didn't want me around. And after Marcus left, why didn't you go back to Stephen? Why didn't you let him see me? Because I was ashamed, and I was angry, and I thought maybe it was better this way. Better for who? For all of us. Stephen could move on. I could start over. You wouldn't have to deal with divorced parents. But Stephen didn't move on, did he? He spent 23 years trying to find us. And you didn't start over. You just became bitter and paranoid about men leaving. And I grew up thinking I wasn't worth loving. I stood up from the table. Other people in the restaurant were definitely staring now, but I was beyond caring. You know what the worst part is, Alice? It's not just that you lied to me about Stephen. It's that you made me complicit in hurting him. Every time I said I didn't want to contact him, every time I told people my father abandoned me, I was helping you hurt a man who'd done nothing wrong. Alice reached for my hand. Britany, please. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. We can work through this. I pulled my hand away. No, Alice. We can't work through this because you're still lying to me right now. You're still trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for you. I'm not. Yes, you are. You want me to forgive you because you made mistakes and you love me. But these weren't mistakes. Mistakes are accidents. This was 23 years of deliberate, calculated lies. You chose to hurt Stephen every single day for over 2 decades, and you chose to lie to me every single day for over 2 decades. I put money on the table for my half of the dinner and started to leave. Where are you going? Alice called after me. I'm going to see Stephen this weekend. And then I'm going to figure out how to make up for 23 years of lost time. What about us? What about our relationship? I turned around and looked at Alice one more time. I don't know, Alice. You taught me that blood family is all you can trust, but you're my blood family, and you're the one who betrayed me the most. So maybe your advice wasn't that good after all. That weekend, I drove 3 hours to meet Stephen at a coffee shop near his apartment. I was so nervous I thought I might throw up. What do you say to a father you haven't seen in 23 years? How do you even begin to rebuild that relationship? I recognized him immediately when I walked into the coffee shop. He looked older, obviously, but he still had those same kind eyes I remembered from my childhood. When he saw me, his face just lit up. We both started crying before we even said hello. Stephen had brought photo albums, pictures he'd taken of me when I was little, pictures from family vacations I'd almost forgotten about. He'd also brought all the birthday presents he'd bought me over the years. 23 wrapped gifts, each one labeled with the year and my age. I know you're too old for most of these now, he said, but I wanted you to know that I thought about you every birthday. We spent 6 hours in that coffee shop just talking. Stephen told me about his life, how he'd become successful in business but never felt like any of it mattered without me in his life. He showed me pictures of the house he'd bought with a big backyard because he'd hoped someday I might visit with kids of my own. He told me about all the times he'd driven by my schools over the years, just hoping to catch a glimpse of me. He'd been to my high school graduation, sitting in the back where Alice wouldn't see him. He'd been to my college graduation, too. You were there? I asked. I've been to every major event in your life that was public, he admitted. I know it probably sounds creepy, but I couldn't miss those moments. I needed to see that you were okay, even if I couldn't be part of it. That broke my heart in a whole new way. While I was growing up feeling like my father didn't care about me, he'd actually been watching from a distance, celebrating my achievements and worrying about my struggles. Stephen also told me about the times he'd tried to approach Alice over the years. He'd written letters, made phone calls, even shown up at her work once. Alice had threatened to call the police and get a restraining order if he didn't stop. I backed off because I didn't want to make things harder for you, he explained. I figured it was better to wait until you were old enough to decide for yourself whether you wanted a relationship with me. Why didn't you try harder through the courts? I asked. Stephen sighed. I did try for the first few years, but Alice kept moving, and every time I found you, she'd disappear again. My lawyer said I could keep fighting, but it would be expensive and traumatic. They warned me that forcing the issue might backfire and make Alice even more determined to keep you away from me. So you gave up? I never gave up. I just changed strategies. Instead of fighting Alice in court, I decided to focus on making sure you knew I loved you. That's why I kept writing the letters and sending money. I hoped that someday you'd find them and understand that I never stopped trying. We talked about Alice, and Stephen was surprisingly understanding. I don't hate her, he said. I'm angry about what she did, but I also understand that she was scared. Divorce is hard, and people don't always make the best decisions when they're scared. She told me she left you for another man, I said. Stephen nodded. Marcus. I knew about him. Alice asked for the divorce because she wanted to be with him. It hurt, but I would have been willing to work out a reasonable custody arrangement. We didn't have to become enemies. But then Marcus left, and Alice was too proud to admit she'd made a mistake. Something like that. Alice was always concerned about what other people thought. I think she was embarrassed about how the Marcus situation worked out, and it was easier to make me the bad guy than to admit she'd left a good marriage for a man who didn't really want her. Stephen's compassion for Alice made me even more angry at her. Here was a man who'd been wronged in every possible way, and he was still trying to understand her perspective. "You're a better person than I am," I told him. "I don't think I can forgive her for this." "You don't have to forgive her right away," Stephen said. "But don't let anger consume your life the way it consumed hers." Alice spent 23 years being angry at me for things I didn't even do. Don't make the same mistake. We made plans to see each other regularly. Stephen lived only 3 hours away, so we could visit on weekends. He also insisted on giving me the college fund he'd been saving. Even though I'd already graduated, he wanted me to have it for a house down payment or whatever I needed. When we said goodbye that day, Stephen hugged me for a long time. "I love you, Britany. I never stopped loving you, and I never will." "I love you too, Dad." It was the first time I'd called him Dad since I was 5 years old. Over the next few weeks, Stephen and I started building our relationship. We talked on the phone every day, and I visited him every other weekend. It was amazing how quickly we connected. All those years apart melted away like they'd never happened. But I was still angry at Alice, angrier than I'd ever been about anything in my life. Alice had been calling and texting me constantly since our confrontation at the restaurant. She wanted to work things out and explain everything properly. She kept saying she was sorry and that she hoped we could put this behind us. But her apologies felt hollow because she was still trying to justify what she'd done. She'd say things like, "I'm sorry you're upset, but I was just trying to protect you." Or, "I'm sorry I made mistakes, but I was a good mother overall." She wasn't taking full responsibility for the harm she'd caused. She was still trying to make herself the victim. That's when I decided Alice needed to experience some real consequences for her actions. First, I contacted a family lawyer to find out if Stephen had any legal recourse for what Alice had done. The lawyer said that while most of the statute of limitations had passed, Stephen might be able to sue Alice for the emotional distress she'd caused and for violating the custody agreement. I shared this information with Stephen and asked him if he wanted to pursue legal action. "I don't need the money," Stephen said, "but if you think it would help you get closure, I'm willing to do it." So Stephen sued Alice for emotional distress, violation of custody orders, and intentional interference with parent-child relationships. The lawsuit wasn't really about money. It was about public accountability for what Alice had done. While the lawsuit was pending, I did something else. I wrote a detailed letter explaining everything Alice had done, and I sent copies to everyone in our family and social circle. Alice had spent 23 years telling everyone what a terrible father Stephen was. She'd gotten sympathy and support from people who believed her lies. I wanted those same people to know the truth. I sent the letter to Alice's siblings, her parents, her co-workers, her church friends, and our neighbors. I included copies of Stephen's letters and the bank statements showing the child support payments. The response was immediate and devastating for Alice. People were horrified by what she'd done. Her own family members called her to express their shock and disappointment. Some of her friends stopped speaking to her entirely. Alice's sister Sophia called me after she got the letter. "I can't believe Alice did this," Sophia said. "All these years we've been feeling sorry for her and angry at Stephen. We had no idea she was lying about everything." Alice's parents were especially upset. They'd missed out on a relationship with me because Alice had convinced them that Stephen was keeping me away from them. They'd believed her stories about him being vindictive and controlling. Within a week, Alice had lost most of her support system. The people who'd been enabling her victim narrative for over 2 decades now knew the truth, and they were not happy about being manipulated. Alice called me sobbing. "How could you do this to me?" she cried. "You've turned everyone against me. These people were my friends. They were your friends when they thought you were telling the truth," I replied calmly. "Now they know you were lying. If you lose them over this, that's your choice. You chose to lie to them for 23 years. But I'm your mother. Doesn't that mean anything to you? You're my mother, but you're also the person who stole my father from me and lied to me every day of my life. Being my mother doesn't give you a free pass to destroy other people." Alice tried guilt, anger, and bargaining, but nothing worked. I'd made my decision. She was going to face the full consequences of her actions, just like Stephen and I had to face the consequences of her lies all these years. The lawsuit settled out of court. Alice had to pay Stephen's legal fees and write a formal letter of apology acknowledging what she'd done. The letter was part of the public court record, so anyone could read it. But the social consequences were much more severe than the legal ones. Alice had to move to a different town because she couldn't handle being around people who knew what she'd done. She lost her job because the story had gotten around her workplace. She essentially had to start her life over at 51 years old. Some people might say my revenge was too harsh. But Alice had stolen 23 years from Stephen and me. She'd damaged my ability to trust people and form healthy relationships. She'd taken hundreds of thousands of dollars in child support while lying about struggling financially. Most importantly, she'd shown no genuine remorse for any of it. Even after being caught, she was still trying to justify her actions and manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. I don't regret what I did. Alice taught me that actions have consequences and that blood family should be held to the highest standards, not the lowest ones. That was 6 months ago. Stephen and I now have the father-daughter relationship we should have had all along. We talk every day, visit each other regularly, and we're making up for all the lost time. Stephen walked me down the aisle at my wedding last month. Yes, I got back together with Simon after working through my trust issues in therapy. Having a relationship with my father helped me understand that not all men abandon the people they love. Alice and I haven't spoken since the lawsuit settled. She sends me cards on holidays, but I don't respond. Maybe someday I'll be ready to have some kind of relationship with her, but not until she takes full responsibility for what she did and stops trying to justify it. The hardest part of this whole experience wasn't losing Alice. It was realizing how much of my life had been shaped by lies. I'm still working through the anger and the grief of all those lost years with Stephen, but I'm also grateful. Grateful that I found the truth before it was too late. Grateful that Stephen never gave up on me. And grateful that I was strong enough to demand accountability instead of just accepting Alice's excuses. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Just because someone is family doesn't mean they have the right to lie to you or manipulate you. Blood might be thicker than water, but trust has to be earned and maintained, even with family members. And if someone in your family has been lying to you about something important, don't let them guilt you into keeping their secrets. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, and it's better to deal with it on your own terms than to let the lies keep growing. Sometimes the people who claim to be protecting you are actually protecting themselves. And sometimes the people they're protecting you from are the ones who love you the most. If you enjoyed this story of family drama and justice served cold, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more real-life revenge stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? Was my revenge too harsh, or did Alice get what she deserved? Thanks for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next one.